Hey everybody, Professor Snart here, checking in on a relatively warm but very wet Tuesday morning after a typical, February thunderstorm rolls through the previous night. Crazy. Anyway, back to our course. So where are we at? We've just finished up Unit 4, kind of wrapping up our look at Sherman Alexie's short story Flight Patterns. We now move into Unit 5, getting closer to, putting all the pieces together for our first essay. In Units kind of 7 and 8, they get combined in our shorter 8-week format. So this is, I've mentioned this before, but now is especially good time to just take a couple of minutes and think about what you've learned in the class. And I get that that can actually be a sort of challenging question right now because we've moved so quickly, it doesn't even feel like we've been in the class for that long. And we haven't really done a major writing assignment. We had our kind of more formal paragraph up here in Unit 3, but we haven't, like I've said before, put all the pieces together in one big essay. So I get that that might be actually a fairly challenging question to ask, and you might say, well, I haven't learned anything in the class yet. I think that you have, but I wouldn't take it like as an insult if you said that you really hadn't. So, and again, this doesn't need to be like a deep reflection thing, but just take a moment to think of the territory we've covered. We've done some basic vocab stuff just for writing the kind of subject matter that we're studying for our course in Unit 2. A major kind of like composition or writing idea that we covered in Unit 3, the shape of the essay or the shape of the paragraph. Again, kind of managing general versus specific statements, always making sure we're laying out an idea, supporting that idea with direct quotation from a primary text, like for us a short story, or a secondary text, which is kind of the research part, which is really the last piece of the puzzle we'll be fitting into place. Consider that in Unit 4, we also talked a little bit about things like thesis statements. Again, it can't just be a statement of fact. It can't just be an opinion. You do have to find that middle ground where it's like an interpretation that you can then go on to sort of refine and support in the rest of an essay. We also talked about writing process, or looked at writing process. We didn't spend a lot of time on it because, like I said before, there's really no one definitive process that will always work for every single person every time. The takeaway for writing process is really that everybody has one. And so you need to be kind of conscious of and intentional about yours, which means that you're evaluating each writing situation, whether it's a discussion board post, a short paragraph, sort of a multi-question thing, a full essay, right? What kind of course is it? What are the expectations? So you're adjusting your writing process based on the demands of each writing situation. So you may be investing more time and effort in especially like planning for a larger essay because, well, it's like literally longer. You've got more to deal with. You're adjusting based on the time frame. So writing process, again, isn't about kind of solidifying steps that you do every single time no matter what you're writing. We almost know intuitively, but it's important to be really conscious of the fact that we adjust our writing process and are aware of it for each writing situation. That's sort of like the more important thing to learn than what are the 5 steps and what order do they go in. And now we move into a new reading that we'll be doing. We're going to do a sort of comparative exercise here that really preps us more for our final essay, which will be a bigger comparison. But we continue to put into place some of the research components that we're interested in. So let's take a look at Unit 5, and then I'll actually look into Unit 6 as well. So Unit 5 is one that I especially like because the comparison is a little bit surprising for people. We also are going to make sure that everybody has a library card. You'll probably need it for units moving forward. And it's good to double check on this because even if you think you've got one or have had one in the past, they do expire. And the worst thing is if you have one or you think you have one and then you go to use it, you're off campus, you need to access like database material, research material, and all of a sudden you can't because it's expired. You don't want to find that out, at the last minute when you're actually in the middle of trying to do an assignment for our course or even for some other course. All right, so there's a quick reading here, a short story called Boys and Girls by Alice Munro. There's a quick quiz, again, a fairly low point value thing. You can have this text open in front of you. It doesn't have to be closed book, not about memorizing stuff. But hopefully the quiz will help to draw your attention to some of the important aspects of that story, whether it's theme or some of the other things that are going on. And then there's a video here by the band No Doubt, fronted by Gwen Stefani, one of their earlier hits called Just a Girl. And what you'll discover is that Just a Girl, the title of the song, is also a phrase that's really, really key in the short story. So the assignment that we're going to work through here is a basic discussion board that's right here, asking you to develop a comparison, finding the similarities between the song and the more traditional text, the text in our textbook. Even though we were kind of thinking of both of these as text, both of these as a form of literature, going back to like Unit 2, where we think really, really broadly about that term. It's not so much the thing itself that either is or isn't literary, it's almost like how we analyze it or we don't analyze it. If we do this kind of analytical work, you could call almost anything a sort of text to be, you know, theorized or interpreted. You support that interpretation with quotation or reference, direct reference to the thing. So that's what we're doing here. So you want to, of course, make sure that your comparison does indeed focus on comparison. So we don't want to talk so much about difference here. Notice that the lyrics are provided. They're pretty easy to discern in the video itself, but you have the lyrics here just for easy reference. And the thing I like about this example is that it's not just a really generic comparison between like both of these texts deal with gender roles. Okay, but lots and lots of things deal with gender roles. What I want us to go is sort of below the surface on that then to discover some of those really literal or much more substantial comparisons. And it's nice for the video that we have the visual element, because one of the things that you'll see in the story is a really strong and obvious use of setting, kind of like that, the visual, right, that we're supposed to imagine. Use of setting to communicate important themes. So really pay attention to the way setting works in the story, and then you'll also see how setting works in a really important way in the video. It doesn't just like give the story or the video a place to be. You know, setting does that in every work, but it really, really in an obvious way contributes to some of the ideas or some of the themes that are in both works. And then, of course, in my example here, we have this really, really literal connection between the phrase "just a girl" as it shows up in the story and carries all of this weight with it, but also the fact that the title of the song is "Just a Girl," and again, as the title, it suggests really thematic, important thematic stuff. So we've gone beyond just, oh, these both deal with, and then fill in the really generic blank, gender roles, stereotypes, right? That's a starting place. But then we want to dive deeper into, can we find some much more substantial connections? So of course we want to quote directly from the story, and we're going to do the same kind of thing with the song, quoting, and you can use the lyrics here to help you, quoting, but we'll just use like a kind of timestamp here. We don't need to worry so much about formal MLA citation in this case. Okay, and then we move on to this really quick exercise that takes the form of a quiz. I don't know if I can get to the bottom of it. You can sort of see it off the bottom here. It's like a 1 point or 1 question quiz. All it's doing is making sure that you have a functioning library card. So if you don't, then it's just a matter of going to the links here and making sure you either get a library card or renew the one that you've got. And not so much that we need it for this unit at all, but we will use it right around the corner, which is what I'll look at right now in Unit 6. Okay, so I think Unit 6 is probably, truthfully, one of the easier units that we do. There's a few new reading assignments, but the actual doing assignment is, even though there's kind of a lot of discussion or a lot of description here, is very, very straightforward. So it can look like a lot, but it's really not. And it preps us, I think, nicely. It puts that last building block into place before our next series of units, which is the first essay. So I'm just going to look at this real quick. There is, it's hard to believe, but Unit 6 puts us at basically the midterm for our 8-week course. I know, it just goes so fast. So there's a really brief survey here just asking you how things are going. It's anonymous, it's ungraded, but it is good for me to get feedback, and it hopefully feels good for you to be able to offer some. If you have like specific technical or grade issues going on, then email me directly, but you know, just a little feedback opportunity. Okay, so a bunch of new readings here. They're all relatively short, like this Valar is maybe 2 pages, page and a half. Araby's quite short, and the rest of them, and I think they're all pretty interesting. So then we move on to, it's set up as a discussion board, but it's pretty just objective reporting that you're doing here. You're going to use the COD website, the library website, and find material in our databases. So one of the things that I'll say now, and I'll reiterate, and you'll find in instructions for like our essay, for example, is that the research component for our course is going to involve pretty much just database material, but there's 2 ways that we're going to think about this. Any research material we find, like secondary source it's sometimes called, is going to be both relevant and appropriate. So appropriate for our writing situation here, it doesn't mean that this is the only kind of appropriate source for every situation, but just for what we're doing here, means that it's coming from a database that we have access to through the library website. So that's the appropriate part. They're professionally produced sources. They go through an editorial process. It's not just somebody throws something up on the web. So it's specific to the kind of writing that we're doing. So anything we use in essays has to be from the databases. That's just a given. So that's the appropriate part. The relevant part means that the sources that we do find in those databases have to be direct discussions of whatever primary text we're talking about. So if our essay is on The Lesson, right, the short story by Tony K. Bambara, that story is the primary text. Secondary sources have to be direct discussions of that text from the databases. So they can't just be, and this is what's all explained here, they can't just be sources that are about sort of a tangentially related idea. So Araby, The Lesson, Valar, a lot of these are about growing up or child psychology, child development. So you could find something in the databases, you get the appropriate part, but that's just a discussion of child development or child psychology. It's not a direct discussion of one of the primary texts. So you got the appropriate part, right, where it's from, but we don't have the relevant part. So this is what, right, the Unit 6 discussion board is doing for us. It's our opportunity to practice, and this is why I think it's really straightforward, finding a source in the database that's a direct discussion of one of these primary texts. So lots of description, but actually a pretty straightforward assignment. It's not going to take you that long. Once you post your own, reply to at least 2 others. And again, here's where we want to double check that everyone's found something that's appropriate and relevant, so you can comment on that. But you do then want to suggest if there's something that's reported by the person in their original post, like not just what they found, but what did they learn from the source that they maybe didn't notice in the primary text initially. It introduced them to an idea or a way of thinking about a character or a relationship, a theme, you know, whatever it happens to be. So even though a lot of the original post is just going to be reporting on what we found, the reply portion here should really focus more on like the interpretation part. And you know, is the text, ideally you find someone who's worked with the same primary text as you but a different secondary source. Sometimes that combination's hard to find. Then you can comment on maybe something that you then learned from this person's original post about that short story as well. Okay, there's a little bit about effectively integrating sources into your writing. We've sort of done that before in earlier units like Unit 3, and that's also all covered in our MLA citation link. All right, so back to our due dates here just to look at all those pieces. So Unit 5 is where we're at right now. We turn around and put that last kind of research piece of the puzzle into place, and then into our first essay. I know it's late in the course by the time we get to it, but to me it makes sense to do all of the pieces first and then put them together and see if we get it. Okay, so as always, if you have questions, comments, concerns, be in touch with me. Enjoy the strange weather, and I'll talk with everybody soon.